He stood over her, his voice trembling with something he couldn't hide: rage, disbelief, betrayal. "You knew all along," he spat, droplets of water glittering in the air from the overturned bucket. The older woman on her knees looked up, face wet, eyes hollow. And in that moment, everything he believed about his life, his success, his identity, began to unravel. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this one. My name's not important, but you can call me the narrator. This is the true inspired story, names changed, of Ethan Cross and Maria Alvarez, the woman he thought he owned, and the secret she held that would shatter his world. Ethan Cross was 26, ambitious, sharp, used to control. He lived in a penthouse on the 45th floor, drove a black sedan, wore suits that cost more than many people's rent for years. He believed in merit, in conquest, in building something no one could touch. A few months ago, his company had downsized, and he'd hired Maria Alvarez as a cleaner. She arrived every evening, quietly doing her work, dusting ledges, polishing floors, emptying trash cans. Ethan barely acknowledged her, except to grumble when something was out of place, when a photograph got smudged, when a floor tile seemed dusty again. But what Ethan didn't know, Maria's life had been careful, cautious. She had lost her husband to illness 5 years earlier. She had a teenage daughter, Isabel, in a modest school across town. She juggled 2 jobs, saved every penny. She never asked for help. One evening, late, when Ethan was preparing for a big presentation, he stormed into his living room to find a stain on the marble floor. He yelled for Maria. She entered, trembling, apologetic, wiping her hands. Ethan lost his temper, tipped over her bucket, water splashing across the tiles, her uniform wet, her face set in shock. He screamed at her to clean it up right now. She stammered, her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cross. I didn't—" But Ethan had already stormed out. What Ethan believed, what he assumed, was that she was just a powerless, invisible worker, someone he could push, someone he could disregard. What he didn't realize was that Maria held something in her memory, something tied to the past, something that would turn his life upside down. 6 weeks earlier, Maria had quietly acquired something, a piece of property, documents, a contract, something he never imagined she could. She had risked everything, working in shadows, staying silent, never letting her guard down. Now that spill, that moment of humiliation, set her wheels in motion. Ethan's nights turned restless. He began seeing her in reflections. He found subtle changes: a lock replaced, a drawer moved, a file missing in his office. He began doubting his own memory. He had always believed that power came from control. But what he didn't see was that the greatest power sometimes grows from silence. As the tension built, Maria's secret crept closer to exposure, and Ethan had no idea how deeply it would never worked a real day in his life. The son of billionaire real estate developer Richard Cross, he was the kind of man who thought luxury was his birthright and respect was something you could buy. Every newspaper headline about him came with the same undertone: arrogance, scandal, entitlement. Parties that stretched till sunrise, cars that changed as often as the seasons, and a reputation that embarrassed his father more than once. But Richard Cross was no fool. Behind the sharp suits and silent expressions, the old man had built an empire from dirt and concrete. He had seen men like his son before, reckless, impatient, blind to consequence. And so, when Ethan turned 26, Richard made a quiet decision. He told his son it was time to prove himself. He handed him the keys to one of the family's oldest properties, a once grand hotel that had long since fallen into disrepair, sitting at the edge of the city like a forgotten relic. "Bring it back to life," Richard had said, his voice measured, almost cold. "And maybe I'll start believing you can handle something worth inheriting." Ethan thought it was a joke at first, a test he'd easily pass. But the moment he stepped into that crumbling lobby, with its cracked marble floors and flickering lights, He realized this wasn't about business. It was about redemption or humiliation. And deep down, he didn't know which one his father truly wanted for him. He arrived at the hotel every morning in a tailored suit, pretending he belonged there, pretending he wasn't out of his depth. The staff watched him with quiet judgment, whispering behind his back. Among them was a woman most barely noticed, Maria Santos. She was middle-aged, soft-spoken, always moving with quiet purpose. She came in when the corridors were empty, pushing her cleaning cart, humming faintly under her breath. Her gray uniform was neatly pressed, her hair tied back, and around her neck hung a small, worn pendant she never took off. No one knew what was inside it. Few ever asked. To them, she was just another cleaner, another face passing through the slow decay of a dying hotel. But to Maria, every hallway, every chipped tile, every faded photograph on the wall held a memory she couldn't erase. Years ago, she had walked these same halls in a different life, wearing elegant dresses, not uniforms. Her laughter had once echoed through the grand ballroom. Her father had owned this place before everything was taken from him, before deals were signed in secret, before his name disappeared from the records, before she was left to start over under a name that wasn't hers. Now she cleaned floors that once shone under her family's legacy, unseen by the very people who had profited from its loss. And as fate would have it, the man now in charge, Ethan Cross, was heir to the very empire that had taken everything from her family. She had known his father's name since she was a child. She had seen it etched on documents, contracts, and lawsuits that destroyed her father's dreams. Yet when Ethan barked orders or tossed careless insults her way, Maria never reacted. She simply nodded, cleaned, and stayed invisible, because she wasn't there by accident. Every night after her shift, Maria would sit alone in the small service room at the back of the building, turning the pendant in her hand, whispering something to herself. It wasn't prayer, it was a promise, a quiet vow she'd made the day she returned to that hotel. And while Ethan Cross strutted through the corridors, believing he was there to prove something to his father, Maria had already decided she was there to reclaim something of her own. But what no one at the hotel knew was that Maria had once walked these halls as the owner's daughter. Power does strange things to a man who's never earned it. Within weeks of taking over the hotel, Ethan Cross turned it into his personal stage. He strutted through the lobby with a smirk, barking orders at the front desk, snapping his fingers for service, and treating every employee as if they were an inconvenience in his carefully curated world. He made small problems loud, turned mistakes into lessons, and always made sure there was an audience to watch him do it. He believed that control meant being feared. He believed respect could be forced. The staff whispered about him in the break rooms, how he dined on imported meals while cutting their overtime pay, how he parked his sports car by the front doors so guests would see who was in charge. To Ethan, the hotel wasn't a test, it was proof that he was untouchable. But in the quiet corners, away from the gleaming chandeliers, Maria Santos worked with the same calm rhythm every night. She never spoke unless spoken to, never complained, never broke the fragile peace she'd built. Yet the longer she stayed, the more Ethan noticed her, how she seemed to know every inch of the building, every corner, every story in its walls. He couldn't explain why her presence irritated him so deeply, only that it did. One morning, as a group of investors toured the lobby, Maria passed behind him carrying a tray of coffee. Her hands trembled slightly, worn from years of labor and age. As she reached for the counter, one cup slipped. The dark liquid splattered near Ethan's expensive shoes. A tiny mistake, harmless until he turned, fury in his eyes. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped, his voice cutting through the soft hum of the lobby. The investors froze. Maria bent down immediately, apologizing softly. "I'm so sorry, sir. It won't happen again." But Ethan didn't let it go. He laughed, cold, performative. "You've been working here how long? Maybe it's time you find something you can actually do right." The guests exchanged awkward glances. One young waiter standing nearby murmured under his breath, "She's just trying to keep her job, man." Ethan turned, eyes narrowed. "Then she should do it right." His words sliced through the air. Maria didn't reply. She only lowered her head, wiped the floor clean, and quietly walked away. The investors laughed politely, trying to diffuse the tension, but even they seemed uncomfortable. Ethan brushed it off as if nothing had happened. But as he watched her retreating figure disappear into the service corridor, a faint unease began to stir in his chest. He didn't know why, but something about her silence felt heavier than words. It was the look in her eyes, not anger, not shame, but something else. Something that made him feel small for the first time in his life. That night, the memory of that moment stayed with him. The way her hands shook, the way she didn't look back. And when he passed the hallway outside his office later, he noticed something odd. A small framed photograph he had never seen before had been placed on the wall. It was old, slightly faded, showing the hotel in its early years, long before his family had owned it. Standing at the center of the image was a man in a suit, smiling proudly beside a young girl holding a small pendant. Ethan couldn't explain it, but the sight made his stomach tighten. He didn't recognize them, but there was something eerily familiar about the girl's face. He looked around for Maria that night, but she was gone. The cleaning cart was left by the door, her supplies untouched. He tried to shake it off, telling himself she was just another worker who'd gone home early. But deep down, something in him knew that wasn't the end of it. He would see her again, and the next time, he'd regret every word. The weeks that followed turned the hotel into a reflection of Ethan's ego, polished on the surface but rotting beneath. He'd begun to believe the place was his playground, the staff his toys. Anyone who questioned him, even gently, paid the price. One afternoon, the hotel's oldest maintenance worker, a man named Walter who had kept those walls standing for nearly 3 decades, made the mistake of correcting Ethan about a plumbing issue. "It's not the pipes, sir. It's the boiler pressure," Walter said, voice steady, hands rough with years of labor. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. "Are you arguing with me?" he asked. The lobby fell silent. Walter stammered, trying to explain, but Ethan waved his hand with a smirk. "Pack your tools, you're done here." Just like that, 30 years of loyalty erased with a sentence. Walter didn't beg. He simply nodded, eyes down, and went to his small locker in the back corridor. When Maria heard what had happened, she found him sitting alone, staring at his rusted toolbox. Without a word, she knelt and helped him fold his work clothes into a plastic bag. "He's just a boy playing a man's game," Walter said softly. "Men like him don't last long." Maria didn't respond. She knew speaking too loudly could cost her everything, too. Later that evening, as the sky turned gold outside the lobby windows, the hotel manager, a thin, cautious man named Reynolds, approached her quietly. "Maria," he said, glancing around before lowering his voice, "I know you mean well, but you need to keep your head down. The boss's son, he's watching everything lately. Don't give him a reason." She nodded politely, clutching her pendant. "I understand," she whispered. But in her heart, she was already past fear. She had seen worse than arrogance. She had seen her family name stolen, her home reduced to ash, her father's pride crushed beneath signatures and lies. Ethan Cross was just another mask worn by the same greed that had destroyed everything once before. Every empire hides secrets, and sometimes they mop the floors. That night, the hotel bar came alive with laughter, music, and excess. Ethan sat at the center of it all, surrounded by friends from the city, their voices loud, their glasses full. He toasted to success, to his vision, to everything he pretended he'd earned. Behind him, the staff moved quietly, their faces blank. Every round of drinks he ordered was charged to the company's account. Every bottle opened drained what little profit the hotel still had. Maria watched from the hallway, her reflection flickering in the mirrored walls as she mopped near the bar entrance. The sound of his laughter echoed through the corridor, mingling with the clink of glass and the hum of a jazz record spinning in the background. He leaned back in his chair, carefree, talking about renovations he'd never start, about investors he'd never impress. The guests around him laughed, eager to stay in his favor. But Maria saw something different. The same emptiness she'd once seen in another man's eyes decades ago, before everything fell apart. She continued cleaning, her movements calm and deliberate, though her heart beat faster with every passing minute. Ethan didn't see her, not really. To him, she was invisible, just another uniform in a place he believed he owned. But the truth was, every night she worked, Maria was gathering pieces, small details, forgotten files, keys left carelessly on desks. She was patient, methodical. Every empire hides its secrets, and she was closer than anyone knew to uncovering the one that built his. While Ethan laughed and bragged, Maria looked toward the office on the second floor, the one he never locked properly. And as the night deepened, she made her silent decision. The next time he humiliated someone, the next time he tried to play king, she wouldn't just watch. She'd remind him that every kingdom, no matter how golden it seems, has cracks in its foundation. Years before the hotel became a monument to her silence, Maria Santos had another name, Mariana Delgado. She had once been the daughter of a man the city admired, a name whispered in the same breath as innovation and integrity. Her father, Henry Delgado, co-owned Cross Group Holdings long before the towers, before the billions, before the name Cross alone became a symbol of power. Henry was a builder of people, not just properties. He treated his workers like family, remembered birthdays, shook every hand on sight. But trust in business is often the sharpest weapon, and Richard Cross, Ethan's father, had wielded it to perfection. In those days, Mariana was 20, bright-eyed, filled with dreams of helping her father run the company one day. She used to sit in the office lobby after school, drawing designs for hotels her father promised he'd help her build. Richard would smile when he passed her desk, compliment her ambition, promise her father they were partners for life. And then, one rainy evening, that partnership ended, not with an argument, but with a phone call. Her father's car had crashed off the old coastal road. They said it was an accident, that he lost control in the storm. But Mariana never believed it. The paperwork that followed was too swift, too neat. Within a month, Cross Group was under Richard's full control, and the Delgado name erased. Their home was sold, their accounts frozen, and the company her father built from nothing now bore only one name, the Cross name. She remembered the day she and her mother left the city. The sky had been gray, the streets wet. She wore the same pendant she still wore now, a small golden locket her father gave her on her 15th birthday. Inside it, a photograph of them standing in front of the very hotel she now cleaned. The Delgado Hotel, before the Cross family renamed it. Her mother had cried quietly on the train. Mariana hadn't. She had sat still, staring out the window, whispering to herself, "One day I'll come back." Life after that wasn't kind. She worked where she could, changed her name, moved often. She learned to hide, to survive, to forget her reflection. Years blurred together, but one truth never faded. Her father didn't die in an accident. Someone wanted him gone, and though she had no proof, she had something more dangerous: patience. When she finally returned, decades later, the city didn't recognize her. Time had softened her face, wearied her eyes. She took the job at the old hotel quietly, with a resume full of false names and forgotten years. No one questioned her. No one looked twice. But every night she walked those hallways, she felt her father's presence, in the creak of the floors, in the distant hum of the elevators he had once designed. She ran her fingers over the brass nameplates that no longer bore his signature. Every room she cleaned, every corridor she polished, was a piece of the past she refused to let die. And then came Ethan Cross, his father's mirror image in youth, swaggering through the ruins his family had built. She watched him and saw the same arrogance, the same smile that once fooled her father. But Mariana, wasn't there for revenge. Not yet. She was there for something else, something more deliberate. She needed to know the truth about what really happened to Henry Delgado. Because buried somewhere in that hotel, behind all the cross-wealth and deception, she believed the evidence still existed. She hadn't returned for revenge. Not yet. The morning Richard Cross arrived, the air in the hotel felt heavier than usual. The staff moved faster, straighter, whispering nervously as the black sedan pulled up to the entrance. Richard stepped out, his expression carved from stone, his silver hair slicked back, his presence commanding enough to silence a room without a word. Ethan was waiting in the lobby, wearing his most expensive suit and his most artificial smile. "Dad," he greeted, trying to sound confident. Richard's gaze swept the lobby, the faded walls, the half-finished renovations, the empty reception desk. "So this is your progress?" he asked flatly. Ethan stammered something about budgets, delays, and permits, but Richard barely listened. "You've had 3 months," he said, voice sharp but quiet, "and all you've done is host parties and run the company card dry." Ethan flushed red, his jaw tightening. "You gave me a dying hotel," he shot back. "What did you expect me to do?" Richard turned, eyes cold. "I expected you to lead, Ethan, to take responsibility, something you've never learned to do." He paused, his tone cutting. "You have no idea what responsibility means." Then, without waiting for a reply, he walked toward the elevator, leaving his son standing in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by silence and judgment. Maria had been mopping quietly behind a column during the entire exchange. She didn't move, didn't speak, but she heard every word. Her hands gripped the mop handle tighter, her heart heavy with something more than pity. For the first time she saw Ethan not as the arrogant heir, but as the broken boy his father had raised. One who had been given everything except love. Still, she reminded herself, pity was dangerous. Pity could soften resolve, and she couldn't afford that. Not yet. Later that night, Ethan's temper finally cracked. His father's words replayed in his mind like an echo he couldn't silence. He sat in his office surrounded by files and empty bottles, the walls closing in on him. Every failure, every mistake felt like a shadow pressing against his chest. When Maria entered quietly to collect trash from the corner, he barely noticed her, until one of her steps squeaked against the floor. His head snapped up. "Do you ever stop cleaning?" he barked. She froze, eyes calm but steady. "It's my job, sir," she said softly. "Not that you'd understand what that means." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ethan's face twisted. "What did you just say?" He grabbed the nearest folder and hurled it across the room, the papers exploding into the air before hitting the wall, just inches from her shoulder. The silence that followed was unbearable. Maria didn't flinch. She simply turned toward him, eyes steady, and spoke in a tone so soft it somehow struck harder than his rage. "You're lucky I don't fire you, too," he sneered, voice trembling with anger. She held his gaze and replied, "I've been fired before, sir. It doesn't scare me anymore." For a brief moment, the room felt different. Ethan's fury faltered. There was something in her calm that unnerved him, a kind of strength he couldn't understand, a quiet dignity that made his power feel like noise. He looked away first. She bent down, picked up the scattered papers, placed them neatly on his desk, and turned to leave. When the door closed behind her, Ethan sat in silence, staring at the papers he'd thrown. Something about her words wouldn't leave him. "It doesn't scare me anymore." The phrase played over and over in his head, unsettling him in ways he couldn't name. Because for the first time in his life, he'd met someone who wasn't afraid of him. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Maria's calm wasn't weakness. It was power. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't strike back, but waits. And soon enough, he would learn that the people who appear the smallest often hold the strength to change everything. The hotel slept under a heavy rain that night. Thunder rolled softly over the skyline, and the wind rattled the windows like restless ghosts. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving the grand building in near silence, except for the soft squeak of a cleaning cart moving down the hallway. Maria Santos pushed it slowly, her uniform immaculate as always, her pendant glinting faintly under the dim lights. But tonight, she wasn't cleaning. Tonight was something different. For 20 years, she had dreamed of this night, the one where she would finally hold the truth in her hands. She stopped outside the manager's office, glancing once over her shoulder. The corridor was empty. With a quiet click, she pulled a small key from the lining of her shoe. It wasn't supposed to exist, not anymore. She'd made it months ago, copied from the one Reynolds kept carelessly on his desk. The lock turned easily. She slipped inside. The room was dark, the faint glow of the city outside tracing thin silver lines across the walls. Her eyes went straight to the cabinet behind the desk, the old safe hidden beneath the framed certificates. Her hands didn't shake as she knelt before it. She'd memorized the combination long ago, after years of observation and quiet patience. The dial turned, left, right, left again, until a soft metallic click echoed through the still air. The door opened. Inside, she found what she'd been waiting for, a stack of aging folders wrapped in faded ribbons, stamped with a name she hadn't spoken aloud in 2 decades. Delgado Holdings, Co-Ownership Agreement, 1989. Her breath caught in her chest. She reached out, her fingers trembling now, and pulled out the documents. The cross seal had been stamped over her father's signature, a lie buried in plain sight, proof that Henry Delgado's share had never been sold, only stolen. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of everything she'd lost. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from the paper, reminding her of the promise she'd made all those years ago. Find the truth, set it right. But then, footsteps echoed from the hallway. A shadow moved past the glass. The doorknob turned slightly. Maria froze. A security guard, the night shift one, young, nervous, stepped inside, flashlight in hand. His eyes widened when he saw her crouched beside the open safe, papers in her hands. For a second, neither spoke. Then Maria slowly stood, calm, composed, and smiled faintly. "You didn't see anything," she said softly. Her tone wasn't threatening. It was almost gentle, but there was something in her eyes that made him nod without hesitation. He backed out of the room, closing the door behind him. Maria slipped the papers into a plastic sleeve and tucked them into her cleaning cart beneath a stack of rags. She turned off the light, locking the door again, her heartbeat steady now. The rain outside had stopped. The hotel was quiet once more, as if holding its breath. For 20 years she'd waited for this night. And by morning, the Cross family would never be the same. The next morning broke with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Ethan Cross woke to a string of missed calls, his phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. His head pounded from another sleepless night, and he barely noticed the message from his father's secretary. "Urgent meeting, boardroom, 8 a.m., sharp." He groaned, muttering under his breath, but something in the tone of that text made his chest tighten. Within the hour, he was in the elevator, straightening his tie, rehearsing excuses for numbers he hadn't improved and debts he hadn't yet explained. He told himself he could talk his way out of anything. He always had. But when the elevator doors opened, something in the air felt different. The boardroom was full, lawyers, accountants, his father seated at the head of the table, silent, unreadable. And beside him, standing calmly in a black dress with her hair neatly tied back, was someone Ethan recognized instantly, the cleaner. For a moment, his mind refused to make sense of it. What's the cleaner doing here?" he scoffed, forcing a laugh. No one joined him. The air in the room was suffocatingly still. One of the lawyers, an older man with gray glasses and a deliberate calm, slid a stack of papers across the table toward Ethan. "Mr. Cross," he said evenly, Allow me to introduce you to Mariana Delgado." Ethan blinked, the name barely registering. "I'm sorry, who?" The lawyer continued, unshaken. "Legal co-owner of Cross Group Holdings." The room seemed to tilt. Ethan glanced at his father, expecting denial, anger, something. But Richard just stared ahead, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the papers. "That's impossible," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. "She's a janitor. She cleans floors." Maria, or rather Mariana, didn't move. She met his gaze steadily, her expression calm but unyielding. "I used to own the floors," she said softly. "Now I just make sure they stay clean." The lawyer continued, explaining in steady tones how the original partnership between Henry Delgado and Richard Cross had never been legally dissolved, how Delgado's share had been hidden, buried under falsified documents and sealed contracts, and how, after 20 years of silence, Mariana Delgado had produced the original co-ownership papers, signed, stamped, and preserved. Proof undeniable. Ethan's face drained of color. He looked down at the signatures, at his father's name beside a man he'd never met. The weight of it hit him all at once. Every party, every insult, every careless display of arrogance, built on something stolen. His entire world, every inch of his privilege, had been built on a lie. He turned to his father, desperation creeping into his voice. "Tell me this isn't real." Richard's silence was the answer. His hand rested on the table, motionless. For the first time, Ethan saw regret in his father's eyes, not for the loss of power, but for the truth that had finally come to light. Mariana, stood quietly, the same calm in her eyes as the night before. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The truth was louder than any revenge could ever be. In that moment, everything Ethan thought he owned vanished. The silence that followed could have filled a cathedral. No one moved, no one breathed, until Richard Cross finally spoke. His voice low, cracked with something Ethan had never heard before. Guilt. "Her father built this company with me," he said, eyes fixed on the polished table. "Everything we own started with Henry Delgado's hands, his ideas, his faith in me." He exhaled slowly, his gaze lifting toward Maria. "I wronged them. I buried the truth, and I told myself it was just business, but she's here to take what's hers." Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious," he snapped. "You're giving our legacy to a janitor?" The words came out venomous, echoing off the glass walls. Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Maria didn't flinch. She stepped forward slightly, her pendant glinting in the light, and spoke with the same quiet conviction she'd carried through every storm. "Your father gave me nothing," she said softly. "I'm taking back what's mine." The lawyer cleared his throat, reading from the documents as if pronouncing judgment. As per the original co-ownership agreement, dated July 1989, the Delgado estate retains a 50% stake in Cross Group Holdings. Murmurs filled the room, confusion, disbelief, admiration. Then, one by one, hands began to rise around the table. A vote. The decision was unanimous. The Delgado name was officially reinstated. Ethan's chair scraped violently against the floor as he shot up, face burning with rage. "You're all insane!" he shouted. "You're letting her walk in here and take everything from us? From me?" Richard didn't answer. He simply turned away, the weight of decades pressing down on him. The cameras from the hallway had already begun flashing through the glass walls, reporters swarming the lobby, security unable to keep them back. The story had leaked, spreading like wildfire across every screen, every phone, every headline. Cross Empire scandal, hidden co-owner, revealed after 2 decades. Ethan stormed out of the boardroom, shoving past the crowd, his name echoing through the noise like a fading crown. Photographers shouted questions he didn't answer. His reflection in the glass doors looked like a stranger, stripped, exposed, hollow. Inside, Maria remained still, surrounded by the board members and her truth. She didn't smile. There was no satisfaction, no triumph, only the quiet ache of justice long delayed. She ran her fingers once more over the papers, her father's signature, now visible again after so many years in the dark. For Maria, this was never just about power. It was about truth. In the weeks that followed, a quiet transformation swept through the cross-group empire. The headlines that once screamed scandal began to shift. Now they spoke of reform, fairness, and redemption. Maria walked through the same marble halls where she had once pushed a mop, but now every worker she passed lifted their heads a little higher. She had reinstated the employees Ethan had humiliated, restored the old maintenance worker to his post, and raised wages across the board. The break room that once buzzed with fear now hummed with laughter. She made sure everyone knew. The days of silence and fear were over. When Maria visited the maintenance man Ethan had fired, she found him sitting alone in the small staff quarters, his hands still scarred from years of labor. "You didn't deserve what happened," she said gently. He looked up, his eyes misting. "Ma'am, I thought people like you forgot about people like us." She smiled faintly. "People like me are people like you." For the first time in decades, the company began to feel human again. Across town, Ethan sat alone in a small apartment, a far cry from his penthouse life. The blinds were half drawn, the television flickering in the dim light. News anchors spoke his name as a cautionary tale. The fall of Ethan Cross, the heir who lost everything. He watched Maria's press conference play on screen. She wasn't gloating. She was talking about rebuilding, about fairness, about giving back what had been taken. And for the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt something unfamiliar, a weight in his chest, regret. For the first time, the voice whispered in his mind, the boy who had everything learned what it meant to have nothing. He turned off the television and sat in silence, realizing the empire he'd been so proud of was never his to begin with, not truly. It belonged to the people who built it, the hands that shaped it, the hearts that carried it through storms. Outside his window, rain began to fall again, just like that first night. But this time he didn't curse it. He watched it quietly, letting the sound wash over him, as if cleansing something he didn't know he needed to let go. Months later, Ethan found himself standing outside the very building where everything had fallen apart, the towering glass structure of Cross Group headquarters. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit this time, no expensive watch, no chauffeur waiting by the curb. Just a plain shirt, wrinkled from nerves, and a resume folded neatly in his hand. The guards didn't recognize him. The reporters had long moved on. The world had stopped caring about the former heir, and maybe that was exactly what he needed. He stepped inside, every echo of his footsteps reminding him of who he used to be. In the boardroom, Maria looked up as he entered, older now, calmer, her presence commanding but kind. There was no hostility in her eyes, only quiet curiosity. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice low. "I know I have no right to be here," he said, "but I want to help. I want to learn how to build something that lasts." The silence lingered for a long moment. Then Maria stood, walked toward him, and simply said, "Everyone deserves a second chance, if they're willing to earn it." From that day forward, Ethan started at the very bottom, not as a cross, not as an heir, but as a project assistant. He fetched coffee, filed reports, took notes in meetings where no one remembered his name. But slowly, he began to listen more than he spoke. He noticed the janitors, the cooks, the clerks, the people he had once ignored. He asked about their lives, their struggles, their hopes. For the first time, he saw the human cost of arrogance. Weeks turned into months. Ethan stayed late, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Maria watched quietly from afar, the same woman he once mocked now becoming the mentor he never knew he needed. In time, something remarkable began to happen. Ethan stopped trying to prove himself to the world and started trying to be useful to it. In a soft montage of moments, him helping an intern fix a presentation, laughing with the kitchen staff, sharing lunch with the maintenance man he'd once fired, we see a quiet rebirth. The boy who once measured life by power and status now found meaning in humility and effort. And as Maria walked past his desk one evening, she paused, placing a file gently in front of him. "You're doing good work," she said. He looked up, eyes sincere. "I had a good teacher." That night, as the office lights dimmed and the city shimmered outside, Ethan finally understood. Redemption isn't given. It's earned, one honest day at a time. 1 year later, the cross-group name glimmered once again across the city skyline, not as a symbol of greed, but of renewal. The grand ballroom was filled with laughter, music, and the hum of celebration. Banners read, "A new chapter, built on integrity." Employees, investors, and families gathered to honor the company's revival. The cameras flashed, champagne glasses clinked, but amidst all the noise, two figures stepped away from the crowd, Maria and Ethan, onto a quiet balcony overlooking the glowing city below. For a long moment, neither spoke. The night air was calm, the hum of the gala fading behind them. Ethan leaned against the railing, looking out at the city lights that once represented everything he'd thought he wanted. "You know," he began softly, "I used to think power meant control, that to be strong you had to make people fear you." He turned to her, his voice steadier now. "Now I know it's not control that defines power, it's responsibility." Maria studied him, the same man who once kicked over a bucket in anger, now speaking with humility. Her lips curved into a faint, proud smile. "Your father would be proud of that," she said quietly. Ethan lowered his gaze for a moment, nodding. "Maybe. I just wish I'd understood it sooner." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "The important thing is, you understand it now." Inside, the crowd began to chant her name. "Maria, Maria," not as an executive, but as a symbol of justice, compassion, and resilience. She turned back toward the balcony view, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. A year ago she was a cleaner, invisible to everyone. Now she stood at the helm of the empire her father helped build, not out of revenge, but redemption. Ethan smiled faintly, watching her. In his heart, there was no bitterness left, only gratitude. He had lost everything to gain something far greater. Self-respect. As the wind rustled through the night, Maria's voice carried softly, almost like a benediction. "Funny how life works," she said. "Sometimes the lowest places teach us the highest truths." And just like that, the cleaner became the queen, and the spoiled son became her student. Never underestimate kindness. Never assume someone's worth by their title. Because sometimes the person you look down on might be the one who built the ground you stand on. Life has a strange way of humbling us, of teaching us that power fades, but character endures. Maria didn't win by vengeance. She won by grace. She chose restoration over ruin, justice over ego, and in doing so, she rebuilt not just a company, but the humanity within it. And maybe that's the lesson hidden in every story like this, that second chances aren't just given to others. They're given to us too, every time we choose empathy over pride. So what do you think? Did Maria do the right thing? Was forgiveness enough? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story moved you, hit that like button.